Hello and welcome to the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Richard Crick from Man vs. Fat. Richard, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you doing today?
Likewise, Lewis. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, mate. I'm good. Yeah, how about yourself?
Amazing. I'm all good. I'm super excited for this one. There's a lot to get into. But as always, first, Richard, in your own words, what makes you a man?
So, do you know what, Lewis? And this was a really interesting one, and I had to take a lot of time to think about it, and it evoked some really interesting questions. So, yeah, first off, I think it's a brilliant thing to really try and reflect on from a personal perspective. I tried to start off by defining all of the traits that make me, so to speak. So all of the things that I would consider myself with from both the personality traits and interest perspective. And then I started to think how few of those actually now are potentially unique to men. You know, I think there's been quite a lot of, I suppose, erosion of the male-only space or the male-only perception. So that was why I found it so challenging. But something that I constantly came back to was how I find from a personal intrinsic level that I thrive within groups or clubs or areas of sort of mutual benefit between men. And for me, I know how almost lost or isolated I would feel without being part of, say, those clubs or those organizations or those brands. So for me, it was that sort of collective group aspect of being with other men. That was what, you know, for me defines me as a man, is being able to communicate and support within those groups and to add value to those groups and actually to be a purposeful cog within those groups, because I know that without that, as I say, I would feel like I was losing not just my masculinity, but potentially my mental health from that perspective.
It was really interesting you were saying around sort of the reduction in sort of men only spaces. Obviously, Man versus Fat is the name. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is that Man versus Fat is and does?
Yeah, absolutely. So Man v Fat is the UK's largest male-only weight loss community. So we're 11 years old, and we were set up originally because there just wasn't really anywhere where guys were finding was conducive to help them to lose weight. Only about 15% of those who get weight loss support here in the UK are male. So, you know, that's an 85% female dominated market. And so, and you often see from weight loss brands that they're very, very targeted to women. And I think that is a sort of a gender ideology around women having that additional pressure to look after themselves from an aesthetics perspective. And actually, that's probably something that isn't put onto men in necessarily the same way, or certainly isn't taken on board by men or a lot of men in the same way. So, and then obviously all of the health ramifications that are almost a byproduct of that, I think really do affect men. So yeah, we wanted to set up that safe space where guys could come along, non-judgmental, agnostic from a approach perspective. So we don't preach a certain type of diet or people fasting or using certain tools. It's very much a place where guys can come along, go on a weight loss journey with other like-minded men, but also sort of improve themselves from a social and a mental health perspective. And actually, whilst there are some phenomenal weight losses, you know, we've helped guys lose 30, 40, 50% of their body weight. Actually, we're finding that the biggest benefits are coming from connecting with like-minded people, being part of a group, having somebody to talk to, having, a community of friends around them. That certainly is probably, I would say, the larger benefit for most of the guys who join Man v Fat.
Why do you think there is a reduction in, I guess, stigma around men's body images, right? The sort of the earned stripes of the dad bod, right? As you sort of age, you're allowed to start to have your gut a little bit more. Why do you think that's still sort of prevalent in society? There is an element of people trying to get fitter, but it still is true, right?
It is, and I think it's because we're probably often not quite as brave as we would like to think we are at going against some of the things that lead us down that path. So, you know, a great example of that is alcohol and drinking, right? And I think there has been a shift in younger generations, and certainly in younger generations of men are drinking less alcohol now for a number of reasons. But actually, there is that traditional, it's quite a laddie thing to go down the pub, have 6 or 7 pints. If there's a few hundred calories in each one of those pints and you're putting them on top of the kebab at the end of the night and you're putting them on top of everything that you've had already during the day, those are the things we like to do. So why would we find a way against doing those behaviours? Why would we lean into something that's ultimately going to put pressure on us to maybe give up on some of those things that we like to do as men?
One of the things that I really like about Man v Fat is that it's 11 years old, right? There's a lot of new stuff popping in the space. So we have things like Andy's Man Club from the more sort of extreme side of things, and then maybe some sort of like walking and talking groups to the sort of less side of it. How did you grow as an initial organization? Because if we rewind 10 years ago, 11 years ago, these conversations of men-only spaces would have been really sort of pushed down from the sort of rhetoric, if you will.
Yeah, they would. And you know what? There were a lot of challenges when we started out. And originally, Man v Fat started as a brand. It was an online e-zine. It was an online web forum, somewhere where if guys wanted to find it, go on there and be a male-only space. There wasn't too much judgment around that. You know, what people do on the internet is generally what people do privately on the internet, right? So they were finding that space themselves, and we weren't sort of too open to criticism from that perspective. I came on board with the organisation about 8 years ago, and that coincided with Man v Fat Football starting up, which is one of the things that's managed to help us get to support, you know, tens of thousands of men now, rather than necessarily a lighter touch sort of aspect online, and where we're actually able to bring people physically together. One of the first tasks that I was given really was to look at how we receive funding in that public health space so that we can take Man v Fat Football to as many people as we wanted to. And traditionally, there's been a real issue in public health of engaging men in any type of health service. You know, so whether that's a stop smoking service, whether that's get them to do their NHS health check, whether that's to go and do some screening, certainly to get them to go and lose some weight. So I always knew that from a brand perspective, it was going to do something that the NHS, public health professionals, you know, funders in this country wanted to try and achieve. But we were going out and we were seeking funding for this program that was undoubtedly going to support those hard to reach type individuals that public health teams traditionally say that they can't support. But when I went out with Man v Fat, you know, a very bold, very brash brand, you know, we're very open, we're very honest, we're very direct. That's one of the things that brings guys to us. They know what they're getting into, they know that space, and they know that it's a bit of a no bullshit type approach, right? People are going to have honest conversations with them, and they've got to face some honest conversations themselves. And a lot of funders were saying, you know what, we would love to bring this to our county. We think it's so important that you're supporting men's health. We think it's so important that actually you've got a brand here that's going to target men and a program that's bespoke to men. But we can't fund you because it's called Man v Fat. So if you could just call it Man versus Healthy Weight, then you know, we'll give you 20 grand to support people in our local community. And as a very small organisation, which had no real income streams at that point, myself, the founder, a number of others in the team, were very clear that we can't do that, because that's fine. You might get some instant funding from that public health team, but the programme will invariably fail because it won't attract those guys that you want it to, and therefore it won't get the outcomes that we know the guys would benefit from, and therefore there is no point in doing it. So, yeah, we had to make some very bold, brave decisions at the beginning to stick to what we believed in, to be able to create a brand where we felt it would really be conducive to men and where they would actually get the benefits that we would foresee them, gaining. And actually, that has paid dividends in the long term. But yeah, in the short term, it was very, very difficult. And we always get asked the question, when is Women v Fat coming? Because people love the idea that we helped guys lose hundreds of pounds worth of weight loss individually, that we have helped guys lose 750,000 pounds of excess weight since we started, and that we've brought so many people together. But the program in its format as it is would not work for women, because the bluntness, the camaraderie, the directness, the gamification, the peer support networks that we put in place are better with men, you know, and that's not to say that some women wouldn't benefit from being part of those environments. They absolutely would. but we would probably alienate a lot of women as well. And I think that is where, as far as we're concerned, we're not touching the sides for what we can do for men's health at the moment. This is a program that, okay, we're supporting around 10,000 men here in the UK, and we've just started Man v Fat Soccer in the US, which again will help a whole new set of guys. Why, when we've got a brand that can do so much for men's health, would we try and dilute our energy by going and doing something that actually there's a lot of out there already?
You see it a lot now, even now, sort of messaging just missed is like maybe it's a conversation that they sort of had around how can we get to men, and they've spoken to no men, and then they've come up with a slogan and tried to make it work, and they're wondering why there's all this conversation but statistics aren't changing, right? I guess it's one of those sort of things. You touched on sort of the community side of things, and obviously that was sort of one of the bigger statistics that I was talking about, but one of those other statistics which is quite shocking, is the one around 1 in 5 men not reaching sort of 55. Have you seen, is that sort of like that age range that you're sort of seeing people that are wanting to make that commitment? So sort of late 30s, early 40s, where would you say the average Man v Fat man sits?
Yeah, so I mean, just to pick up briefly on that point of so many men not making the age of 55, I mean, dying by suicide is the leading cause of death in men aged under 50. And from being part of the community that I spearhead, it doesn't surprise me, because so many men are feeling isolated and alone before they get to that stage. I had a very sort of strange Saturday a few weeks ago. I was waiting for a train to go to the Man v Fat Awards, where we celebrate the best in the Man v Fat community. We bring together hundreds of guys from across the UK. We have a special guest, and we hand out a bunch of awards and bring people together. And while I was waiting for the train, I saw a young gentleman run onto the tracks and take his own life. And to see that he felt that was his best option, and that he really didn't feel that there was anyone out there for him or anything of purpose for him to continue his life. And obviously I don't know, his background, and actually I did try to do some, just for my own sort of personal reflection, I tried to look into, see what was said in local press. Did we have a name? Was there anything that was said about this gentleman as a sort of an homage to his life? And I found that it was a generic article of a station was closed for 3 hours. Station was closed for 3 hours. Emergency services arrived on the scene, and the station opened 3 hours later. So I assumed it was lazy journalism and went looking for more. And I found a very similar article on the same incident. And then as I scrolled down, all I could find was almost the same generic article appearing every single week in the same Essex tabloid, that this was happening again and again and again. And for me, if this was people dying by a mode of transport, or by COVID, or by an infectious disease, or by, in schools, or by knife crime, it would be on the news every day. It would be talked about as commonplace. And it isn't. It isn't. It's great that the government are doing a men's health strategy, and hopefully that will bring some of that to the fore. But actually, this is still a topic that we're not talking about enough. This is still a topic where people are dying silently, and they're just not discussed, and we all just move on. Another station closure. That's sometimes how it feels, and that's sometimes is certainly how it felt for me when I was looking back on it.
Do you think that men need a bit more of a push? Like, there seems to be this sort of as men age, so as they sort of get into later life and start to take on other responsibilities, so job, wife, family, kids, whatever it might be, everything else seems to come to the bottom of the pile, and ironically that's usually themselves. What do you do to encourage men to sort of take that hour and a half for themselves?
Yeah. I mean, so a lot of our guys, the reason that they are so successful on the program is because typically they're not doing it for themselves. So what we would find is we put them into a team environment, right? So they play six-a-side football week in, week out. They're added to a team of like-minded guys whom they haven't met prior to coming along to Man v Fat football within a league format. And we encourage them to think of themselves not just as, somebody who's part of FC 20 Stone or of OB City, but actually as somebody who might be part of Man v Fat Colchester, for example. So they're looking out for everybody else on their league. But by weighing in that week lighter than they did the week before, they score an additional goal for their team. For every 2 guys that lose weight, they get an additional goal for their team. So actually, the reason that they make a lot of the behaviour changes that they do within the week is because they don't want to let the team down. And I think that's often why they fall into the trap in the first place when, as you say, personal circumstances fall that they take a backseat on their own interests or enjoyments or mental health because they want to look out for others. And others often is that family. And we're very, very often finding that, guys are coming to the club after maybe it's that they've relocated and they don't have anybody around them in that new area. We find that, guys have not played the sport that they grew up with and loved for 15, 20 years because actually they had their first kid, that took priority, there wasn't time for it anymore. Work pressures were, very, very high and they wouldn't be able to balance that. They've just got married and actually, the relationship, they needed to make sure that they were fully invested in maintaining their relationship and therefore they felt that it would be to the detriment to go out and do other things. But in reality, actually, having them as a balanced individual who is happy within themselves, what partner wouldn't want their partner to be happy? And so therefore making sure that they do prioritize that time for themselves. And actually a lot find that it's a little bit of a, they had a bit more leverage at home than maybe they thought they did. So, actually so many partners of players of Man v Fat are incredibly invested in their journey. And actually, their impact of changing attitudes around physical activity, eating healthier, being more sociable, all of those things actually benefit their family as well. Their kids have healthier meals at mealtime. The dads are more likely to run around with their kids at the weekend when they're playing football. All of these things have those added benefits. And it's only often when they start being part of our community and then have that realization, do they sort of start to realize that actually, this is good for my family as well as for me.
Yeah, I've got an interesting question that I was sort of thinking about. So one of the big things for sort of men and sort of loneliness is when they sort of leave these things. So they may have played five-a-side as teenagers and then they've, in this scenario, got too fat and don't want to play with those guys anymore, or they may have got injured and can't really play anymore. With your model, the guys are losing weight, right? They're on a health kick. Once they get to a desired weight or a weight that they can maintain, what's the sort of things in place to keep them a part of that community and to keep them sort of involved and encouraged to continue to come, essentially?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was a big conundrum for us when we started, and actually, where we are now, so 8 years on of Man v Fat football, we've changed a lot of things since day one to make sure that the program is reflective of the community that we're supporting. Now, the biggest thing for us is that you're going to Man v Fat football. What we certainly don't want to do is alienate the biggest guys there. So we don't want big guys to come along, might be 18, 20, 25 stone and find that actually they're running around with a bunch of whippets because all these guys have lost the weight and actually, they don't really need to be there. But in reality, the vast majority of them do still need to be there for their own personal accountability and because, they've made friends within the team. And actually, it's working out how we make sure that we find that balance. So we've done a number of things to make sure that we do that. So we would call those guys that you're referring to, by the way, as BMI bosses. So guys that have been on their weight loss journey, they've hit within a healthy BMI range. So that's between 18.5 and 25. Now, once those guys get within that range, their scoring algorithm changes. So instead of scoring half a goal for every player that loses weight on a team, they score a whole goal for staying within that healthy range. What we don't want to do is incentivize them to lose more weight because once they're within that healthy range, we don't want this to become an addictive personality aspect. So that's one of the considerations that we have. The second consideration that we have is a draft system. So every 3 seasons, and this goes back to when I was talking about the club mentality rather than team mentality, we want them to feel like they are part of a larger community, not just their team of 10 guys. So the draft system, every 3 seasons, which is roughly a calendar year at Man v Fat, we do a draft and we split those guys up. So we split up the best footballers, the lightest guys, the heaviest guys, the goalkeepers, so that we get a fair reflection, and so that those guys who are joining feel part of a team who has the lighter guys and the heavier guys within it. Also, we have an assistant coach program. So often guys who have respect from people across the group, who have been on a really positive weight loss journey and are seen as, idols, people who, when you're starting Man v Fat, you might say, well, how did you get to this weight? Where did you start? Those become assistant coaches. So we give them a complimentary membership, and they basically assist the coach of the club. So that, as these clubs grow, we sometimes see 60, 80, 100 men. So actually having that additional resource there of somebody else to help with the weigh-ins, have those conversations, speak to new guys as they're coming in, is incredibly valuable. And we're really proud of the fact that almost half of the coaches now across the UK are guys who have been through the program, who have lost weight themselves, who have learned how to communicate that to others, either through the assistant coach program or just stepped up and wanted to apply for when a new club opportunity came up. So we've got guys who have been there and done it on the journey. So as I say, those guys, when they get to that point, they are welcome to stay within the community. They're championed. They're used as a resource to inspire others. But we also know that for a lot of these guys, if they are football motivated, they feel like they've got to where they want to be with their weight and their mental health. And actually, as a team, they might have a group of them who have been part of the community for, say, 2 or 3 years. They might want to go and play their 5-a-side, their 11-a-side elsewhere. Almost every Man v Fat club in the UK, which is 155 of them, have created their own 11-a-side football teams. So these 11-a-side football teams would not be there without the clubs having kick-started them. And they become a community in themselves. They become somewhere else for them to play football. And they become somewhere else that is somewhere where they can lean on others as not just teammates, but as friends as well.
That's amazing. It's those are the people you want around, right? You
Yes.
want the people that are the success. So it's a good way. You've got to keep them away somehow. You've got to keep them because they're going to fuel the next generation and the next guys. And there's a bit of a thing with guys as well, like I don't believe you until I see it, a bit of a doubting Thomas. So having those guys that have sort of been through the whole thing is really beneficial for sure. What are some of the other perks for losing weight within Man vs Fat?
Yeah, so I mean, the big thing that I find fascinating, I'm very fortunate enough to be able to go out to these clubs, and I love speaking to guys and hearing what their journeys are. And often, you just couldn't write it. So I've spoken to guys on the sideline, and we interviewed some of these guys for a part of our 10 Years of Man v Fat series. So the FA and Everton gave us access to Wembley and Goodison Park, and we filmed some of their stories. And, this was guys who, so really varies from a gentleman who is roller coaster obsessant. He used to go over to Florida all the time. Basically, he got to a point where he was starting to go on the rides and he was getting turned away. And his friends and family were going on the ride and he couldn't do the one thing that he looked forward to every single year as part of his holiday. So he joined Man v Fat so that he could get back on roller coasters again. Whereas, the next guy that we spoke to, he lost weight because his dad needed a life-saving operation, needed organ donation, and the weight he was at, he was the only donor match, but he wasn't in a fit state to be able to donate. So he lost weight to then go on and be able to donate his organ. We've had other guys who have joined because they've had a lot of issues with being able to conceive, and actually through losing weight, they've improved their chance of conception. Their partner followed a similar pattern to what they did, but through their own means, and actually they've managed to conceive, and now they have a little 2-year-old. So everybody's journey is very, very different. We're finding it really interesting in the US because over here we're finding that obviously everybody has, almost everyone played football through the school scheme here, right? Whereas over in the US, a lot of guys have never played soccer before, but actually we're finding that their kids play soccer. So the game is now getting to the presence where actually they might be playing at school or they want to engage, but actually the dads don't know how to play football. And actually they're being motivated by the idea of coming along and learning this as a new sport, as well as being part of a men's health community. So everyone's journey is different. And I think, that's one of the reasons why we stick to that principle of being sort of agnostic in our approach, because we know that actually just for most guys who need to lose an excessive amount of weight, actually alcohol reduction, smaller portion sizes, less takeaways, slightly more activity. These things aren't things that you don't have to go into David Lloyd and have a £200 gym membership to be able to do them. They're everyday changes that guys can make that are for the better of their health and for the better of their families.
Yeah, it's really good to see that these sort of small changes and these sort of incremental changes are adding up. I mean, we're not talking about people becoming bodybuilders or becoming sort of model ready. It's just getting to a point where you're essentially functioning again a little bit more as a man. What would you say to someone listening who is maybe a little bit anxious about joining something like this? It may be any group whatsoever, but that's a big common thing we come across, is the anxiety of just turning up.
Yeah, it is. And it's very, very common. Very common. And, when you reflect on it as adults, and okay, I mean, Lewis, okay, we're both in sociable jobs and we're used to speaking to people, and that's what we do. But actually, as adults, certainly compared to when you were a child, you're not as used to going into new groups of people, right? I mean, as a kid, you're just put into a party, you accept it, you might throw a bit of a tantrum, you move on, and everybody's good. You can't do that as an adult, but you can make the decision not to step through the door in the first place. And that's often the easier one, and therefore that's what people do. And yeah, it's so common. We've had guys who have struggled with agoraphobia on the program, so not even coming to the club was the main issue. It was just stepping out the front door. And to see, that was another one of the gentlemen who we interviewed for the 10 years of Man Be Fat series on YouTube, was a guy who just getting to a park bench outside his house was his first challenge. And then his partner actually drove him along. He watched from the car park, watched the guys coming in, coming out, could work out the personalities, could work out who the coach is, knew his entrance route and exit route. That made him a little bit more comfortable. And then we ended up, the coach might come to the car door, tell him a bit more information, and then to go along. But it is about taking those first few steps, and I think it's contextualizing it as much as you can. Obviously there's a number of things you can do around anxiety to get self-help. Anyway, one of the best things for that is physical activity, is walking, is getting out and about. But is trying to contextualize what if I don't do this, and what are the things that I'm maybe not loving in my life at the moment that mean that they're not going to change if I don't make any changes. And then what are the prospective benefits to me making that? And go out there and do your own research on any club or group. We are in a world now where you can pick up your mobile phone and find out very quickly whether an environment is potentially welcoming or not, what the main sort of shared values of that group are, and how other people like you. And I think there is a big people like me thing. I think people want to see people like them and see how they get on in that environment before they're willing to take that step. So it's not a coincidence that we always make sure that we show the biggest and the smallest guys on our advertising. It's not we want the guys to be speaking to camera. I can tell you what I feel about Man Be Fat and the community that we have, but that's great. I'm not a guy who goes every week and steps into that environment. I'd much rather you speak to our players and let them tell you about it.
I think one of the things that's most recently gone viral for you guys is from the Peter Crouch podcast, yes, where someone had written in and sort of had a conversation around the team names, and they were absolutely creasing themselves at some of the team names. I will let you sort of get into that in a little bit, but one of the other things I want to touch on is that banter side of things. Why do you think banter is so powerful for men when it comes to more serious topics?
I think it's one of the ways we deal with things, right? I mean, from a humour perspective, I know there's jokes that we would have with my mates or in my football team or in our WhatsApp group that my missus wouldn't enjoy, and she knows that would be the case. And I do think that for the vast majority of men, humour, the things that we find funny, the directness, the fact that we're willing to go there in some things is something that, makes us men, and that's something that we can sort of all relate to. So yeah, I think that camaraderie, I think often it's a way of guys saying what they want to say without having to do it in a lovey-dovey, fluffy, hug, personal space type manner, right? It's a get around. And I mean, as somebody who is absolutely awful at DIY, I love a get around. That's how I move things forward.
Yeah, it's a powerful tool, but I'm cautious of like where it's sort of going. There seems to be there was a sort of an anti-men space because of this idea of men getting together and sort of almost banter getting out of hand and becoming a little bit too far. For me, I feel like men need it. I feel like men need that release as well as sort of a physical or a community release. I think they need that ability to almost test boundaries a little bit, right? And just sort of see where can we take this. So
Yeah,
sort of go on.
but no, I was going to say I think we do. I think there does need to be some gentle fences put around as boundaries, and I think it's understanding your audience is a big thing, right? So I'm not a fan of a lot of the stuff that's been happening over the last few years of people pulling up tweets from 20 years ago that a sportsman said, for example, right?
Yep. For
me, that was where they were at in their life at that point, and that was their view or their opinion at that time based on the circumstances and the landscape around them. I think it's Jimmy Carr who famously says that he's already told the joke that's going to get him cancelled. The world is changing around us, and I think that, there's definitely, I have an 18-year-old nephew. Some of the things that we would discuss, he would take a different standpoint on to what I would, and I would say I'm probably quite sort of centre-left in terms of my personal sort of values and beliefs. But I think it's, somebody once said to me, it's being careful about thinking it's not necessarily what you say, but how what you say could be heard. And I think that you have to be mindful to make sure that we're still good to each other, that we look out for each other, that we understand what each other's personal values or boundaries are, and that we don't step on those. But equally, I think it's our place to communicate back to people when they're uncomfortable with that. And equally for people who we might be speaking to, say, I'd appreciate, not to be judgmental or critical of us, but actually just say, do you know what, actually, from my perspective, I'm a bit uncomfortable with that. Could we not go there, please? Or could you be a bit more respectful of that? I think it's that knowing your audience thing, right? Once you know your group, 9 out of 10 times you're going to get that right, and you're all going to find it amusing, and you're all going to be still respectful of each other, and you know what your true value is as opposed to what is being said in words.
Yeah, I actually think men are really good at that. I think men are actually, I think it's almost a skill we have. It may take a bit of time with new people, but I guess you just move that fence a little bit and see what sort of lands. I don't think you rarely find a bloke who comes in and just goes straight to the moon with something.
Straight to the juggler. No, and we don't. I mean, we find all the time guys pushing the boundaries on team names. We talk about those team names, and again, it's finding what is right and what is funny. And you can certainly find plenty of funny ones, whilst also, not being disrespectful to someone or something.
So where did the team names come from? Was it just a case of you needed a team name and they've just slowly sort of gone from
Absolutely, yeah, they've snowballed from there. So, I mean, we like teams and clubs to have their own identity. So we mandate, about 80% of what goes on at clubs. But actually, coaches can run individual challenges for themselves. They can run their own events. They can run their own social media pages. And that gives them that colour. That gives them that personality. And, there is constantly a challenge to find who's going to get the next best team name. And, we've had 1,000,001 OB cities. It doesn't get old. It's a great name. But I much prefer the ones that are like, I saw a new one the other day, Moobs Like Jabba. They go full belt, so they create the badge for you. So you've got Jabba the Hutt with, the full writing going off into the background, Moobs Like Jabba. I like the personalised ones, so the ones that are unique to a certain league. For example, the league in Leighton is in the postcode E10. So the team was E10less FC. All of those type of things, rather than maybe some of your more generic and unathletic FCs or those type of things. Al Fatty Lad is another popular one coming out from the Middle East.
Nice. Yeah, great. Absolutely got a lot of time for them. You mentioned right at the beginning that people are pushing for women v fat, but what about you sort of want to reach more men? So what's next for that? Because not everyone likes football. Not everyone wants to play football. Have we got a darts league coming soon? What's coming?
Yeah, so do you know what? We're an incredibly small team. So there's only 12 of us work here at Man v Fat HQ full time. So it's making sure that everything we do, we want to make sure we do it to a standard, and we want to make sure that we do it in a way in which is sustainable. Because if it's not sustainable, then, Man v Fat isn't here. And if that community isn't here, then that's thousands of men who effectively, won't receive that level of support. We have grown astronomically over the last 11 years. So going from the original book and the e-zine to then creating the first Man v Fat clubs 8 years ago. Football now has gone from that one club to having 155 clubs across the UK, England, Scotland, Wales. We're supporting around 8,500 men. Pre-COVID, that was maybe 3,000 or 4,000 men a week. We've just launched Man v Fat Rugby to try and reach out to some of those guys who, exactly as you say, aren't interested necessarily in football, but do want to be part of a like-minded community with gamification, peer support, competitive sport. So rugby has been going really, really well. We've managed to get the vast majority of the rugby league sides on board as delivery partners. And actually we had the Warrington Club launch last night. The guys went into the Warrington Wolves Stadium. They went into the dressing rooms. To have that local connection with their local community will only strengthen those bonds for lots of other things. I have no doubt about that. And the RFU have been very, very positive about it as well. We continue to work with the FA and the FAW from a football perspective. As of today's recording, so in a few hours' time, we're launching Man v Fat in Dallas. So my colleague is there launching it to 70 guys out in Dallas, with Fort Worth starting, Man v Fat Soccer Fort Worth starting tomorrow night. We already have 3 clubs in New York. We already have 3 clubs in Florida. Next week, we'll be joined by Man v Fat Orlando, and we'll be joined by Man v Fat Houston as well. So the US is certainly, obviously ahead of World Cup 2020. Know that a lot of guys are looking at football or soccer, as they would upsettingly call it, to become, better athletes, part of a community, try a new sport, better men. Yeah, that's where, rugby and soccer is where our energy is going. As I say, as a team of 12, it's very difficult. We've talked cycling, running, darts, basketball, more online stuff. There's so much we could do. And as I say, we know we're only scratching the surface, but until we have more resource, I think it's unlikely that we're going to get to that very, very quickly.
There's a fine balance, right? You want to keep your core narrative. I think as something that we're doing, I've obviously launched my own non-profit. It's very easy to be sort of swayed by, I've got an idea, or this is something that we can do. Yeah. And you can just grow sort of outward. I mean, soccer, football is multinational. It's the largest sport in the world. And I think you'll be almost fine with just that.
Yeah, right? But this is it, right? Because if we see men who feel like they could benefit from being part of our community, to a certain degree, we feel like we're not doing our jobs if we don't find a way to embrace that. But equally, you spread yourself too thin, or you lose those core values, then you're really not achieving what you set out to do. And are we open to diversification and finding other ways? Absolutely. But as you say, so many people approach us with great ideas, and often they are great ideas. But as soon as they take you too far away from those sort of, original goals, they can become a distraction, and then other things suffer. And as I say, it's making sure that we stay on track with those is really important to us.
As someone who's been in the men's space for about 8 years, and probably a little bit longer, but 8 years with Man v Fat, what are some of the things that you really like right now or have seen in the past, and what do you want to see more of in the future for men's health?
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that the government are coming out with a men's health strategy, and obviously there's a consultation open on that at the moment, and anybody, you don't have to be working in the men's health space to be able to offer your opinion and your insights on that. You can go onto the government website, give it a Google, and you can contribute towards what you would like to see within that health strategy, and I think that's really, really important. There's no doubt that organisations like Man v Fat and other men's health organisations are starting to be noticed by, at a political level. They're starting to understand that actually this is a space that they need to lead into and support. And that for me is really, really positive. And I think there is, the emergence of mental health first aid training courses years ago for me, that will only benefit men. But as you say, the statistics aren't moving to the level that we would want to at the moment. And there's certainly more to be done. But I think there is a more openness regarding that. I think for me, I would love to see more services, not necessarily where they're not engaging men, not going, well, that's because men are hard to reach, or that's because men don't want to come, but actually asking that question and doing that research onto, well, why are they not coming? On a personal level, right? Getting a GP appointment for me is a nightmare. Now, I'm very fortunate that from a diary perspective, I manage my own diary at work, and I can make sure that I can go to health appointments as and when I need to. But for a lot of men who are working in more sort of physical jobs, or jobs that maybe don't have, or companies that don't have the understanding and the flexibility around, I can see why they're not getting the opportunity to go to a GP. I can see why they're not getting screened. I can see why they're not accessing services, because services are they might be open from 9 till 5. Well, I'm not going to take a whole day off, because particularly if I am self-employed, or, that's held against me at work and it holds up another job, I prioritize that. And actually that's the first step to somebody going, well, that thing is more important than my health. And then it's very difficult to find a way back. So I would love to see services making themselves more conducive to men. And I'd love to see men just showing a bit more vulnerability. I mean, our guys are very good at it at Man v Fat, but I think the reason that they're getting or are becoming good at it is because it's a domino effect. It takes 1 or 2 people to talk about it for somebody else to go, oh, well, I don't know why I didn't talk about it. I mean, there's a charity called the Robin Cancer Trust, which was set up off the back of a guy called Robin who lost his life to germ cell cancer. His brother Toby is currently, shout out to Toby, he's currently running Hadrian's Wall is dressed as a giant bull bag, by the way. So not just running Hadrian's Wall, he's dressed as a giant pair of testicles. I would absolutely recommend getting him on. But yeah, and he went to the King Charles Garden Party the other day, got invited along there, and was talking about running past Buckingham Palace as a giant ball bag. But it takes him, and for Robin to have passed away, for people to go, oh, actually, maybe this is something that I need to talk about a bit more. And maybe it's okay to, see a giant ball bag running around. Maybe, hang on a minute, what do I need to do to get involved with this? Why aren't I, checking my own testicles? And people aren't good at having those conversations. People aren't good about talking about it. But if we're all a bit more vulnerable about talking about it, we normalise it, and then everybody else will. So less will just be good to each other, I think, is the other big thing for me. And again, I think we're getting better at it.
Yeah, I think more safe spaces for men. I think men aren't scared of talking. They just need the right people around them, and they need to feel that they're in a good place to do it. Yeah. So I couldn't agree more with that statement. Richard, it's been an absolute pleasure. If the listeners want to find out more, join a local league, how do they do it? And I'll leave the final thoughts with yourself.
Yeah, so just pop on, as I say, to manvfatfootball.org, manvfat.com, or just pop it into your favourite search engine and we'll come up. You can go find a league. So you just pop your postcode in there, and then it will tell you where the closest ones are to you, what night they are, and you can sign up, and then a local coach will reach out. And yeah, I mean, as I say, I think it's really good that you're having these conversations for men, Lewis, because, as I say, that there aren't enough of them out there. And I think that guys understanding that male-only spaces and maybe that historical erosion that we've been seeing over the last 10 years, and maybe a bit of resurgence more recently, that it's good, it's healthy to go to them. Don't feel like you're causing a detriment to anybody else by taking time out for yourself. If you're a better person, if you're a better man, you're going to make a better partner, a better father, a better husband. So that's what I would encourage people to do.